there is no self. Now, those of you who've been to some of my meetings before will be astonished to hear that opening. As in, how can you use that same old tired opening over and over and over again? Well, because it's not the best place to start. There is no best place to start, but it's as good a place to start as any, and it's a great deal better than a lot of other places that we could start. There is no self. That's really all this is about. If you've come here thinking it's about something else, sorry. It's a disappointment maybe, but too late, the door is now locked. There is no self. Well, as a statement, that's not that original. And as a statement, it's not that interesting either. But the suggestion here is that the reason I'm hesitating is because all sorts of obvious words come into the mind at this point, which I know are very misleading. Words like experience. It's possible to experience that. Well, if there's no self, there's no experiencer, how is it possible to experience it? So that's wrong, can't say that. Well, can say it, but it's a bit misleading. Everything that I say about this is going to be misleading, already has been misleading. So I'm going to settle on one of the statements which seems to me to be less misleading than a great many other statements we can make, even though it's still misleading, which is the suggestion from here is that non-duality can be directly seen. Yeah, it's not as big a misconception as some of the other things that we could say there, so I'm going to stick with this particular misconception. Non-duality can be directly seen. Who can it be directly seen by? By no one. So the suggestion from here is that there is a possibility. I think I'm in a spiritually romantic mood this afternoon because I wanted to add the word divine possibility. So what the hell, I will add it. There is a divine possibility. Don't challenge me too hard on what that means. But the suggestion from here is there is a divine possibility that the non-existence of the self can be seen. Why, even in a spiritually romantic mood, could I call that divine, a divine possibility? Because in a way, it's the only hope for release from, I'm going to use the word pain, from the pain of being a person, of being an individual. And already I'm feeling bad now because I just introduced the word hope. And I have written and talked many, many times about how hope is a curse. Hopelessness is a blessing and hope is a curse. You see how difficult this is? You know, every word is a trap, every concept is a trap if we want it to be. It's so easy to nitpick about this because words really, really can't get it. Nevertheless, we've kind of got a contract with each other, haven't we? We've sort of got a contract that, at least for some of us, we're going to spend 3 hours together. For others, it may be too much, and some of you may run screaming from this room before the 3 hours is up. And some of the time we'll be drinking tea and eating biscuits. But we've got a kind of contract that we're here to spend at least some of the time talking about the inexpressible, effing the ineffable. So as long as we understand that we're engaged in something impossible, so you don't feel too badly about me when we fail, and I don't feel too badly about you when we fail, then we might just about be able to get along, hopefully. That's the core suggestion. You know, and this isn't philosophy, it isn't concept. I mean, you can make a philosophy out of this, and many people do. Oh, excuse me. It's not about concepts. There's plenty of concepts about this, but they don't matter. The suggestion is you have to stop again, because the next obvious phrase is, this is an experience, but it's not an experience. That's the obvious thing to say. So I think this, you know, the concepts about this don't matter. The stories that can be and have been written that fill volumes miles high about this don't matter. You know, actually, nothing really matters about this or about anything else. But nevertheless, the suggestion from here is that there can be a direct, but boom, next obvious word, experience of this. No, it's not an experience. But there's no other word to replace that. Why is it not an experience? Because what we're really essentially talking about here is the disappearance of the experiencer, the one who experiences. So how can it be an experience when there's no one experiencing it? And yet there's no other word, because language collapses. Why are we even bothering with this? Because language is utterly, totally, irredeemably dualistic. It's kind of obvious, you know, language splits reality up into bits and pieces. You know, a chair is separate from a light bulb, is separate from a Richard, is separate from a floor. Language is irredeemably dualistic. But if we're going to try to describe this, there's absolutely no reason why we should, but if we're going to describe this, we can only do it in language. Oh yeah. It's okay.
No self is something that is commonly used even in the Buddhist tradition.
Yeah.
How do you define no self? I just want to go to the basics.
Yeah.
What is no self?
This is going to be really frustrating. It's the absence of self.
Sorry?
I said, and I'll repeat the whole thing because I think the first bit's very important. This is going to be really frustrating.
No, this I heard.
It's the absence of self. It's the absence of self. Now then, now what we could do, and we may do this, I mean, I'm quite open to doing this, but what we may do now, or in a few minutes' time, is attack that cognitively, you know, with understanding and concepts and like, what does that mean, and da-da-da-da, and if we feel there hasn't already been enough of that. I mean, you mentioned Buddhism. I mean, the Buddhists are wonderful at taking an intellectual scalpel to this and eviscerating it and taking it apart and putting it back together. It's absolutely lovely if you like that kind of mind stuff. But essentially, what I'm saying here is that this is seen. I'm now trying to avoid using the word experience, having kind of said, well, it's a bit of a tricky word because it implies an experience. So, well, I say it can be seen. Well, that implies a seer. Well, I'm sorry, but let's take the seer out of it and the experiencer out of it, and the suggestion is, therefore, that there is just this. What that means is, whatever appears to be happening, we could say that in the normal or common, everyday, all within inverted commas around them, experience, there seems to be somebody, let's say, sitting here and sitting there, here or there, experiencing that. So that's basically, if you like, duality. That's dualism. You know, there are two things, and those two things, bad word, but never mind, those two things are the sense of a person, the sense of a self. There's a separated individual and everything else. and everything else, we could sum it up as, let's say, the world in which the separate individual seems to move and through which the separate individual seems to move. So that's duality. What's the duality? Why two? There's obviously lots more things than two. Well, duality, which is in a way the normal experience of most of us, is that there's me and there's everything else. We might as well call that the world. And me moves through the world, interacts with it, sometimes interacts with it rather painfully, as in when I brush up too hard against the table, but much more painfully when I brush up too hard against another individual me. You see? So that's essentially a description of duality. Why only two things rather than the myriad of things? Because there's that sense of me and everything else. The suggestion from here is that one of those two things, the sense of me, being separate from everything else, can simply collapse. Not only can simply collapse, but does simply collapse in quite a lot of cases. And then you don't have duality, then you have non-duality, unity, whatever you want to call it. Because the distinction between this and that, between me and other, between here and there, collapses. Or can collapse. Does this get anywhere near addressing whatever, I can't even remember what it was you brought up, but does this get anywhere near beginning to address that? I feel like from the look on your face the answer is probably no, but please. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just I heard this term so many times from various. I just thought, what is the definition really? It feels like starting a talk like that with a non-dual is so obvious that you'll say the only thing is no self, and then I thought maybe just define what is not self, because obviously it can't be that obvious unless it falls away. Yeah,
it's worse than that. We could say it's not only not that obvious, it's impossible until it falls away. And if it drops, even for a split second, and quite often that is what happens, there can be like a split second of seeing. Even in a split second of falling away, it's like it's obvious. Blindingly obvious. Was it Jeff Foster wrote a book, The Elusive Obvious, was it? Anyway, there's a book called The Elusive Obvious about this, which may or may not be by Jeff Foster. It's elusive because I'm going to say it's very difficult for us to find it, and I'm going to immediately contradict that, saying, no, it's impossible for us to find it. But in a way, this is another slightly romantic phrase, which, it'll do. In a way, we could say it can reveal itself. That has nothing to do with me or what I think I am. And then that obvious, seemingly absolutely obvious separation between me and everything else collapses. Not because I merge in some wonderful, translucent, transpersonal, heavenly way with everything else, but because the me is seen through. It's seen to be not there. Are we getting anywhere or not?
Well, even the word me is problematic.
Yeah.
So how,
Yeah, so absolutely, it's highly problematic, just like every other word I'm using.
Yeah.
So what I'll say about that as a description, what am I using that word me as a shorthand for that sense of separation, for the sense that this is something, and I'm using something very deliberately there, this is something that moves through something else. or if you like, moves through everything else, moves through something else called the world outside me. So I'm in here, and there's a world outside me, and I move through it. Sometimes delightfully, sometimes hugely problematically. The hugely problematic part often happens when I have a sense that I am moving through this external world that's separate from me, and I bump up against other I's that are moving through the world feeling separate. So all we're talking about is the possibility of that collapsing. And immediately, because unless it's already collapsed, unless that's collapsed, these words, these ideas, if you like, the ideas the words represent, are being heard by an I that feels himself to be separate. You know, then all sorts of natural but quite misleading questions are likely to arise. Like, oh, well that's great, then tell me how to do this. Tell me how I can drop me, who don't wish to... I'm hoping, if I try that sentence again, you'll see again how ridiculous it is. How can I drop the me which I have just now understood from what you said doesn't exist? How can I drop the non-existent me? I hope, you know, that at the least the paradox in that, and perhaps the kind of, in a way, the ridiculous nature of that statement, or that question, can be heard. But in a way, as long as this feels separate, it's kind of like the only orientation this can take to this communication. I nearly said message then, but it's not a message, because a message sounds like it's something important. I have a message for you. Here, read it quickly. Look, Mafeking has been relieved. That's a message. It has import. Okay, this isn't a message, it's a communication. Oh, God, you are nitpicking with words this afternoon, Richard, aren't you? No, there's a really big difference there between a message and a communication. Because a message necessarily, I'm going to argue anyway, has import, it's important. Now somebody's going to contradict me. Oh, well, I got a message saying, can you remember to bring home a pint of milk? That's not important, but it could be very important, right? But a communication is just a communication. You know. Here, it's just a hopeless attempt to communicate something that can't be communicated. Right? So this isn't a message, it gets turned into a message by the separate I that seems to exist. The separate I hears this and turns it into a message. Worse, it turns it into a philosophy. Worse still, it turns it into a religion. Worse still, it turns it into a method. That's what the I does. You know, I am now a worshipper at whatever, the divine altar of non-duality, or I am now going to practice mindfulness for 18 hours a day, or whatever it might be. That's how the I may hear this, may hear it, because it hears it as a message. You know, have you heard, or the good news, maybe even worse, the good news. Have you heard the good news? We're here to celebrate the good news. We are one. Now let's sing a hymn. No. I mean, it's natural for us. It's natural to hear this like that. Another really natural way of hearing this is, oh God, this is so boring and nothing to do with anything I'm remotely interested in. That's how the majority of people hear this. And it's a total mystery why that should change, as it often does. I mean, it did for me, it did for other people sitting here, I know. And for many people, of course, every time I use a word like people, I should put in the air quotes. It did for many other people out there. Why? It's a complete mystery. When these apparent ears first heard this communication, the reaction was complete, well, two reactions, both beginning with complete boredom and total bafflement. I mean, didn't understand a word of it and didn't want to. You know, in the story of a Richard moving through time, 2 or 3 years later, 2 or 3 years older, who knows why, heard this communication again, still totally baffled by it. That did not change. Still totally baffled, but something. What the hell is this? And somewhere a fascination arose. Why? That's the most obvious question for the mind to ask him. Why? How come? What made the difference? Who knows? So all these why questions as well kind of collapse, because it's just seen that it's not that they can't be answered. Of course they can be answered. They can be answered in dozens of different ways, but the answers don't mean anything. They're just conjectures, if you like. So what the mind is continually doing with this is it hears this, and then the mind will tend to conjecture about it. And out of those conjectures, it will build a story. And if it's given time, it will build a very complicated story, and it will turn it into a religion. That's what the mind tends to do. But at the heart of all of this is just this complete mystery. Why should this be heard in one apparent moment of time, and the response is absolute boredom and frustration, oh, this has nothing for me, and then heard in another apparent moment of time, and there's this magnetic fascination, even though the understanding is still completely missing. And even though then, perhaps later on, some understanding is there, but then it's realised by then that understanding is completely irrelevant, so who cares? So we're back to the frustration again. There are people who have there are apparent people, there are apparently individuals who have the most exquisite understanding of this, of what we're talking about, and no seeing whatsoever has happened. And then there are individuals where seeing has happened and there is almost no understanding of this. A phrase that's just popped into my head that I've used before and I've written before is this is like an insult to the mind. If I might have already used it this afternoon. One of the things that happens with non-duality, if you haven't noticed already, is it does tend to bugger your memory, even more than age does. Memory gone. I'm quoting somebody else there, but I might as well say that myself. So there can be seeing without any understanding, there can be understanding without any seeing, there can be both, there can be neither. There can be a fascination with this, there can be a boredom with this, and none of that has anything to do with who I, as a person, think or believe myself to be. In other words, it's all just simply happening. Apparently. It's fashionable in non-duality circles to put that word apparently in, but there is a reason for it. It's a reminder that this is an appearance. It's an appearance. Why say that? What does that even mean? It's an appearance. Well, it's suggesting that this is less solid than it seems. appears to be real, oh my God, are you saying it's unreal then? No. I'm saying, as others say, it's both real and unreal. It's both. To say it's unreal is misleading because something is apparently happening. To say it's simply real is the stance, if you like, of the one who feels separated, the one who seems to be moving through a separate external world as a separated individual. For them, this seems just to be real. Well, it's both. It's kind of real. It's kind of real. This is kind of a real glass of water that seems to have a weight to it, and just checking, that seems to be wet. But it's also unreal. This both is and isn't. Everything both is and isn't.
When you say it's unreal, that's kind of scary for me.
Okay, so it's heard as scary, yeah.
Because, you know, I'm separate, this is my sense of I'm here and you're over there.
Apparently.
But this, I mean, when you say it's real and unreal, it's like, oh no, it's real. You know, I get this kind of...
Yeah. So what is it about the sense that it may also be unreal? That, do you know? I mean, you may not know, it may just be a feeling, that's fine. But do you know why that feels scary or seems scary?
Well, I would say intellectually it's like a lack of control.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's as far as I can go.
Yeah. So this is. Can I just address that one, because it's really crucial. It's really important. You know that what is being said here is absolutely not that there is someone there who is out of control or who may lose control, or for whom lack of control may happen. Absolutely not. What I'm saying is far, far worse than that. Yeah. There is no one there. There's no one there. So questions of, am I in control, or am I out of control, or a bit of this or a bit of that? Do I have free will, or am I subject to externalities totally, or a bit of this, a bit of that? You know, I have no real choice about whether I have a boiled egg for breakfast, but perhaps I have a little bit of choice about how long I boil it for. No, none of that. It's much, much worse than all of that. You know, there is no one. So a feeling arises, or a thought arises. I don't know, maybe it was a bit of both, a bit of a thought.
It's a feeling.
A feeling of fear, oh my God. You know, I would say that's not uncommon when brushing up against this communication. It's not uncommon at all. But, no, I'm saying something far worse than you may be at least partially and perhaps wholly out of control. Much, much worse than that. Or much, much, much better. That may depend on how it's heard. See, there's a promise of freedom in this. There is a promise of freedom in this. I mean, I have said and others have said, this is the only real freedom. It's the only real freedom. But the individual might hear that as, oh, freedom to do all sorts of things. Absolutely not, no. Freedom from the burden of being a separate person. Being a separate person, it turns out, is a tremendous burden. And it's freedom from, not freedom to, freedom from the burden of being a person. So what I'm suggesting here is that fear may arise. Is anything else happening apart from fear? Any other sensations, thoughts, feelings apart from fear? Is the fear all consuming?
I don't know. It's
Well,
kind of you know, like I've been kind of following this non-duality for about 10 years now. So, you know, it's like goes on and on.
yeah.
And
So this isn't a shock to you,
No.
and yet nevertheless the fear.
No, I've heard, I haven't been to many meetings, but I listen on YouTube and, huh?
I said tut tut. That's all right.
I read your book.
Good. Okay, you get a brownie point for that. Only one of them?
Yes.
Okay. Right. That has been noted in the heavenly books. The heavenly ledger, yeah. But there's, you see, there are other things going on. There's movement and there's a head nodding, and there's probably, maybe, there might suddenly be an awareness of, I don't know, the temperature in the room. There's always lots of stuff happening, and in that there's fear, which is something happening as well. Yeah. But I'm really, and this is maybe one of the most common misconceptions about this. I'm absolutely not talking about a person, an individual who is discovering, or maybe at least hearing somebody madly suggest to them, that they are a person who has no choice, who has no free will, who much, much worse than that, much worse than that. I mean, I think philosophical and conceptual discussions and arguments and books and so forth about free will, can be fascinating. I mean, I find them quite fascinating in a way, but it all just collapses. None of that in a way is relevant here, because what we're talking about here, just, there's no one. There's no one. Do I have free will? Do I not have free will? Well, I have it maybe a little bit. Perhaps I don't have it a lot. Perhaps I have it a bit. Perhaps I don't have it at all. Maybe I've read Sam Harris. Maybe I've read da 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 da. And in a way that will, no, not in a way. Just that all collapses. Becomes irrelevant. Who is there? No one. Am I in control? Do I have free will? Am I out of control? Do I live in chaos? Am I subject to divine forces? Blah, 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 but endless blah. All collapses. I've told this anecdote many a time. I was giving a talk once long ago, and somebody said, so what you're saying, we were talking about free will and choice and blah, 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 and she said, so what you're saying is, so I could go out on the street and murder people. I mean, I don't know where to begin with that. I mean, I was very polite. This was actually a friend of mine, and she was very nice and so forth, so I was extremely polite. But in a way, where do you begin with that level of mishearing of what is being said here? There is no one. Oh, there's no one, so that means I can go and murder people on the streets. There's a chap in that, what, eh?
No, I get that. I get that. I get a lot of things, but...
But what?
I don't know.
But Richard, would you agree that no one's ever murdered anybody?
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. And yet,
Murder has happened.
we might say, in the appearance,
Murder has happened.
Yeah. So, but you can hear also how this can be taken as a huge affront also to morality.
Yes.
As long as I persist in, on some level, I have this feeling, this belief, this concept, whatever it might be, that, but never mind, all of that, but, there is somebody in here, and they do have this, somehow, this precious thing called free will. As long as that is there, then of course this is heard as the most appalling challenge. Yeah. So I'm sure you know, and there's a kind of formula for this in a way, you know, on the non-duality circuit. And I'm sorry, but there's only so many ways of saying things. So yeah, you know, murders happen. What do you mean? What a terrible thing to say. Yes, I'm sorry, most of this is terrible. I mean, maybe this is why some of us speakers try to inject a little levity and a little lightness and the occasional joke into this, because it's so terrible in a way. But it's wonderful.
Yeah.
It's terrible and wonderful.
So what's been happening over here is that since I saw you here a few months ago, there's this ever increasing lightness or relaxation, and there is a diminishing, if you like, of the self. There is a seeing, I'm seeing through the self, so to speak. And sometimes, if not often, there's this looking at the same things. It can seem like I'm looking at those things for the first time, especially in nature, just a sort of brightness or a clarity or a oneness. And on those days, there's a diminishing of the self. I don't feel very capable or competent in doing things. Does that sort of make sense a little?
I'm not quite sure about it. It all made perfect sense until that very last statement. I'm not sure about that one. Maybe we could come back to that. But apart from that, as a description, this is very common. Yeah. There can be just this, you know, I mean, this can happen in, I want to say explosion. I don't know why, so I'll say it, even though I don't know why. You know, and there can be a kind of opening to it, which isn't a sudden explosion, and very often for reasons which, you know, I'm thinking two things at the same time here. I'm thinking, one is I can't explain why, and the other is, well, it's bleeding obvious why, it doesn't need an explanation, it can't be put into words. But that kind of connectedness, that's not a good word to use, but let it go anyway, with nature. Very often the case, very often the case. I remember Tony telling this story years ago, you know, Tony suggested to people that if I want to say if something happened, in other words, if nothing happened for no one, maybe, you know, the no one might like to phone Tony and talk about it or whatever. And he tells this story about someone who just phoned him and said, Tony, wow, he said, I've just been sitting in the garden for half an hour watching an ant crawl along a twig. And for the busy me, the busy mind of a me, not all of them, but many busy-minded me's would find that astonishingly boring or whatever. But when that collapses, it's just like the simplest thing can become fascinating, absolutely fascinating. So what you're saying about, especially in nature, I mean, I think, you know, I don't know whether Tony would object to my describing him like that, like this, but I think sometimes, you know, Tony is also kind of a bit of a, I want to use the phrase spiritual romantic, and I think, no, I really shouldn't use that, but nevertheless, let it go. But it's one of the reasons I like his communication. He talks about the beloved.
Yes, yeah.
Well, let's not call it spiritual, I'll have him ring me up, but it's kind of romantic, I love it. There's something about nature that brings somehow, nothing, this is so paradoxical, nothing can bring me closer to what I already am, and yet somehow there can be an apprehension of that, sometimes, for some non-people, for some individuals who don't exist in nature. In a sense, that's nonsense. I've said many times, we may associate what we seem to be looking for here with silence and stillness, and we may go to silent and still places, like, for example, monasteries, to do retreats, to get more silence and stillness. And if a person collapses, all of that is seen as just ridiculous. Not that we may still want to go to monasteries and have retreats, who knows, but when this collapses, it's just seen that the I usually pick on Piccadilly Circus, because it's not usually thought of as silent and still, not in the middle of a hot Sunday anyway. But there is as much silence and stillness in Piccadilly Circus as there is in the most ancient monastery, or anywhere.
Yes.
Because everywhere is silent and still, as well as moving. And yet, somehow, for characters, nature can elicit that sense, let's say, more easily. And yet, you know, when the self has dropped, there may still be a yearning to be in nature, and yet a recognition that in Piccadilly Circus there is just as much silence and stillness.
I've actually found that like you described the ant scenario, someone looking at an ant, it's not boring in the slightest. And secondly, the nature thing can apply to any surroundings where suddenly something can seem fresh, the flooring or something.
Yeah.
There's a freshness to
Yeah.
everything, as though you're looking at a floor for the
Yeah.
first time almost.
It's not things or events that produce boredom, it's the coagulated, condensed,
Solidity.
unsatisfied individual. There's very little that we can say, well, there's nothing, well, no, there's very little, I'll stick with, that we can say about this absolutely. And certainly, in a way, talking kind of experientially about, well, what's it like? That can be very misleading, but nevertheless, I've talked to a lot of people, I've had communications with an awful lot of people who aren't people anymore. And there are some commonalities, and the disappearance of boredom is one of the most noticeable ones, and one of the most common. So it's, you know, I don't know what's happened to me, Richard, all I can say is I'm not bored anymore. I don't know what's happened to me, Richard, but all I can say is I'm not depressed anymore. Those are two commonalities, that boredom tends to end and depression tends to end. Whatever else happens, who knows, but there are some commonalities, and those are two of them. So when boredom ends, the ant crawling over the twig is as fascinating as anything else.
Could you say something about being in, was it Piccadilly Circus you said?
Yeah, I just picked it as a noisy, busy place.
The silence, I don't understand that.
No, neither do I. You can't understand it. I'm talking about something which is directly, and here language is difficult because the natural thing to say is directly experienced, but it's not an experience. So I'm going to go for perceived. It's directly perceived that in movement and noise there is silence and stillness. No, I can't explain it. All I can do is describe it, and then I listen to other voices and I hear other voices say, yeah. But that's because not it's been experienced by them, it hasn't been experienced by me either, you know, but it's been experienced. Who by? By no one. The no one that's replaced, you know, whoever. If it's Mary recounting that experience, then that's been seen, if you like, by the no one that's replaced Mary. So I can't describe it. It's one of the reasons why when this is even glimpsed for a sort of split second, the kind of seeking that has this, whatever you want to call this, divine puppet, you know, this body-mind organism, psychophysics, whatever you want to call it, the kind of impulse that tends to have this, let's say, for example, I've got to go and do this retreat I've been told about in the Himalayas, you know, I've been told about this very special cave, and if you sit in this very special cave and meditate, you know, profoundly, it's why that just becomes ridiculous. It just collapses. Because it's seen that nothing that this, as a separate individual, thinks that it has to do and does do can have any relevance. Not that it matters. It has no relevance. It's neither relevant nor irrelevant. It is just what it is.
So it's not like a landmark. So if I stood in Piccadilly Circus and felt silence, I go, ha-ha.
Yeah, it is only Piccadilly Circus. No. No. Even the centre of Wolverhampton, even there, it will be as still and as silent as everywhere and nowhere. Yeah.
In soldiers' memoirs, they recount at times where in moments of intense battle with bullets flying over their heads, they see this silence or this stillness and they experience it, and they go, suddenly, poof, all the fear, all drops away, and it's just,
Yeah, so there's a method for us. Sign up for the most dangerous
Special Forces missions.
Yeah.
I can't remember its words, but someone whose granddad was in World War I went over the top, no man's land, suddenly at that moment he just saw it was this pure. I can't remember the words, but they were very much non-duality.
Yeah.
I'm assuming, or am I going to ask you, is there any difference between the silence and stillness and the appearance? I don't see how there can be.
That's a good question. Is there any difference between the silence? They are, again, language is tripping me up, because the natural way of answering that, well, not the natural, but the kind of obvious way of answering it is, they are, of course not, they are the same.
Even more mysterious then. Even more mysterious then.
Even more mysterious than what?
Well, than the original mystery.
Why?
Well, it isn't really. I'm being facetious here. It's
Okay.
it's not. It's clear that
That's my
there
job.
can't be. Pardon?
That's all right, I just said that's my job.
Okay. It is just clearly that there can't be, and sometimes there doesn't seem to be. So I don't know why I asked, but just I suppose some doubt came up. Really.
Yeah.
Yes. And the other thing that
They are the same. Yeah, they are the same.
I
The
realised.
roar of that bus as it goes past is the same as the roar of silence. Yeah. It's a good phrase.
What was that?
I like that one.
If I may, whilst you were talking, it came that, of course, it's impossible to communicate because there's no one to communicate, no one to receive, and nothing to communicate.
Yeah, and yet this happens.
Yeah. Well, this is something
Yeah.
different. Well, it's not different, but yes, it's not. Yes.
Well, it's an attempt to put into words that which, we're back to the ineffable.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very paradoxical. I want to say, there is something, oh God, I'm going out on a limb here. There is something special about meetings like this. There's nothing special about anything. Everything's kind of in a way the same, and yet, there's never any more. How can there, everything's still and silent and moving and making a noise. Everything's still and silent. How can anything be more still and silent than anything? It can't be. And yet, there is something special and different, even though it's not, about meetings like this.
It seems a flowering of something, really. That's how it feels, anyhow.
And I think maybe it's partly about the lack of agenda. As in, There's no one. Well, it's the lack of agenda has to do with two things. There's no one sitting at the front who wants you to get something, and there's no one at the front who believes that they can give you something. Which is, yeah, that's also different.
Different and perhaps unique in the sense that other meetings you go to, you expect to hear something that you can take away and apply, learn and apply. Whereas with this, something else seems to happen.
Yeah, it's unique to this kind of communication, I would say, yeah.
I'm beginning to realise that how I might experience so-called other people is actually just a reflection of what I'm believing about I might be. It's the same thing.
Can you say a bit more about that one?
I'll try. Sometimes I can see, I get annoyed with someone, and I perceive them as something for a bit. But that is just what I'm saying is only see them that way because that's how this is appearing.
Right.
It's the same. What I'm saying is exactly the
So
same.
that's appearing and how that's feeling?
Pardon?
And part of the
Yes.
how that's appearing is and how it's feeling
Yes.
in particular will construct, that will construct how that sees whoever,
So
how that is feeling, yeah.
So that the less there seems to be someone here, the more open
Yeah,
everything is.
Yeah.
And more, tolerance is the wrong word, but tolerance and understanding and love is more, that's all.
it is very likely to be, yeah. Yeah. I won't go down this road very far, but I'll just go down a few steps. Is, again, talking about commonalities, there are commonalities reported in what remains after this has been seen, and one commonality is there tend to be fewer projections. So projections is what we put on other people that makes me, the individual, see you, another apparent individual, in the way that may have nothing to do with what's actually there. I project my own psychological shite, so you maybe you're sitting there nodding your head and smiling, being friendly, looking friendly, and maybe I see you as aggressive because of something in me, typical kind of projection. So that's again something that tends to collapse or at least diminish, is the projections that
Why only
we make.
diminish? Why only diminish? How come it's not complete?
Well, there's no rules.
Yeah.
There's no rules.
Why are there not rules?
I don't know why there are no rules. You have to ask God that.
God.
Yeah.
Oh.
Who are you going to go to? Who are you going to go to?
I was going to ask you about the word miracle before.
About the what?
The word miracle.
Go on.
You use the word miracle.
Oh no!
So.
Go on, what did I say?
You said.
I
that-
forget what I say almost before I've said it, so what did I
I'll
say?
remind you then.
Oh God, I shouldn't have invited this. I hear trouble going. No, go ahead.
Yeah, you said when you described that you had this message of non-duality a few times and
Yeah,
that's
very
right.
bored by it.
Yeah, and then something happened, and this miracle can happen sometimes, and the miracle can happen that people will. I think that's what.
Did I?
Yeah.
Yeah? Have you got a witness to this? Come on, there's 140 other people in the room. Did anybody else hear that?
And I didn't hear miracle.
It's
not your kind of word.
I mean, we only hear what we want to hear. So.
Well, no, I may well have done. I've already used this phrase several
but
times this afternoon, you know, sitting here, there is the personality which is partly, this does not sum me up, but partly I am a bit of a spiritual romantic, so I may well have said that.
No, you definitely use the word miracle, but how we interpret it is a different matter. But what I wanted to ask is about this miracle that happens to some and not to others.
Well,
what is this? I mean, you mentioned now God. I didn't know it exists.
There, I don't know whether to say I would, because I can't remember what the sentence was, I don't know whether to say I was being metaphorical or ironic, but it was definitely one or the other.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's no miracles.
Well, everything's a miracle, you could say. I mean, this is astonishing. When this is astonishing. Let's go back to the ant crawling over the twig. It's astonishing.
Why?
Because when there's no one there looking at it, maybe, I mean, there's no answer to that question why, or let's say there could be numerous answers. There's a problem with why questions that really trip us up.
Yeah.
You know, but when it's seen that, I mean, it's just a sign of this, which seems to be incredibly full. It seems to be. I mean, it's full of movement and sound and colour. Look at that shirt, for example. Just that shirt. Just forget about everything else in this room. Just that shirt, arising out of nothing. Doesn't that deserve the word miracle? I'm still not admitting, and I think the word at this point is admitting. I'm still not admitting using that word because, to be honest, I just can't remember or not. It happened more than 20 seconds ago, so it's hopeless. But let's say, you know, why not use that? I mean, look at that. Look, there's an apparent hand here that seems to be animated and moves through something that seems to be space. Space, there is no space. For this to seem to move, there must be time. Without time there can't be movement, but there is no time. And yet there seems to be time, but there isn't any time. And there seems to be space, but there isn't any space. I'm quite happy to use the word miracle for that. I know I've used it in books that I've written about this, I admit to that.
I don't mind the word miracle, just I think some people call it grace. I just wanted to understand the concept of if there was something like it's called miracle, grace, whatever it may be called, it has to happen to someone, the one that doesn't exist.
Yeah, it has
Just
to.
the puzzling. I know, you know, also paradox is one way to answer all the questions
Yeah,
around
of course.
But just.
You've read the training manual for non-duality speakers. Yeah, when you're pushed up against the wall, just say it's a paradox. It often is. It usually is. It almost always is.
That's why I just asked I'm challenging the obvious words that have been used over and over again.
Yeah.
Not for the sake of it, just for either my curiosity or my understanding.
Now go back.
Or my frustration or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, the frustration I really, really relate to. Oh God, I had so much frustration listening to this kind of communication. So much frustration.
Has that been replaced with gratitude? Do you feel gratitude? Is there gratitude?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Gratitude to no one, for nothing. Yeah. Yeah, and the frustration's gone. Of course. Have we got a mic? Yeah.
Someone's at the bed.
It may be for a therapist upstairs. I want you to go back to. You probably can't. I can't because I mean, you know, I'm not joking when I say. I mean, I'm exaggerating when I say my memory lasts 20 seconds.
Yeah.
That is an exaggeration. It's 15 seconds. You know, it's not a joke. So I don't know whether you can go back to the miracle thing because there was something you said in there, and I wanted to. I had a response, and then it went.
Yeah, I think you
mentioned. Is this seeing non-duality or is it senility? This is an important question to hang on to. If they have some of the same characteristics.
Is it what, sorry?
Is it seeing non-duality or is it senility?
What is senility?
Dementia, or, the collapsing mind from old age. They definitely have some similarities, one of which is memory gone. I'm not going to complete that, so there's a lovely sentence from an Australian writer about this. I'm not going to complete that sentence. I don't know what it is about. Maybe it's nothing to do with you, maybe it's more to do with me, but I have a reluctance for some reason to use quite the degree of bad language I usually do in these meetings, so I'm going to leave that quote unfinished. But memory gone. Memory gone.
Yeah, I found it.
Miracle. The miracle.
Yeah, I think when you described your, apparently what has happened to you when you were listening to this message many times and it didn't, you didn't respond to it at all because it didn't matter.
No, I responded hugely to it with frustration.
And then once you did listen to, you listened once and it's as if the miracle happened.
Okay, no, that's not. I understand. Yeah, it's. No, I listened. I became hooked eventually, and listened with lots and lots of frustration.
Yeah, and nothing happened.
And then the frustration kind of, oh God, I'm going to stop asking questions because they don't get me anywhere, and blah, blah, blah. It's wearing me out, it's wearing everybody else in the room out, it's wearing the speaker out, blah, 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 blah. And then there was a split second of no one. That's all. I want to say to start with, and as I say that, I know that's ridiculous because we're back into time and the story, but as we're telling a story, then there was a split second of no one, and it was, oh shit. And then the questions, there's this huge mountain of questions. I stopped asking them, but they were still there. I'd learned there was no point in asking them, but they were all still there. And all these questions just went blah, 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 and collapsed. So that's what he was talking about, he was talking about, he was talking about, she was talking about. So one split second of direct seeing. Is worth, the reason I hesitated was because I don't know how to finish that sentence. One split second of seeing is worth 1,000 books, 2,000 hours of talks.
Was there laughter? Was there laughter?
Not then there wasn't, there was finally, yeah, not in that first glimpse. No.
Was there crying?
No, there was shock, astonishment, a kind of, a recognition of the impossibility of the mind ever having.
That's why I asked, was there
that.
crying? That's why I asked, was there crying?
You mean like
From the shock
gratitude or frustration?
Exactly,
or
from gratitude and the shock.
Yeah, there wasn't here at that point. But there was then a kind of huge amount of stuff kind of going on that level.
Mm.
I don't mean I got a nicer haircut, I mean inside the head, apparently. What an amazing phrase that is, inside. There was just like so many things fell into place. So a lot of the questions died at that point. The point is, in a way, for the one who's separate, it seems like, it's, if you, from the first time that this has been kind of conscious of being an individual, so I'm not talking about the baby, the 9-month-old or whatever, but from the first time this or that or that or that has been conscious of being human, almost certainly, not certainly because there are a few exceptions to this, rare exceptions, but almost certainly everything is experienced from the point of view of a person located here. Everything. So it seems obvious that if there is a solution to the dilemma that the individual finds himself in, however you describe that, that solution has got to come from one of two places, because there are two places and there are only two places, apparently. One is out there and one is in here. So the solution has got to come from some secret out there that I discover, or some realisation in here that is somehow revealed to me. I mean, that's living in separation. It's got to be. There's no possibility for almost all of us of having any sense or imagination of any other possibility. So the absolute shock with the realisation when that separation collapses, that it's nothing to do with a secret out there that I can find or a secret in here that I can find. There's nothing to do with that. It is simply the fact that that division doesn't exist. That division, that everything in life up to that point, everything in life up to that point, probably everything for most apparent individuals, has been experienced as this in here experiencing something else other than this. And that just collapsed. Now, many people who sit in rooms like this, and the same for myself, you know, maybe have a kind of spiritual seeking past, meditation, for example, all sorts of things. And so, perhaps spiritual experiences. But I've made this point often. I mean, spiritual experience is lovely. You know, I'm not knocking spiritual experiences, but they've got nothing to do with what we're talking about here. And the giveaway is in the word experience. So spiritual experience, no matter how translucent it is, and I'm very well aware that spiritual experiences can be highly translucent, nevertheless, it's an experience with an experiencer, no matter how evanescent and translucent and faded out that experiencer may be. So just that split-second seeing can be, I mean, the shock can be just tremendous. And the realisation as to why this could never have found that. So in seeking, there's a this and there's a secret. There's two things. I could say there's a this in here and there's a secret out there. Two things. And that is the basis of seeking. And the shock of seeing that collapse.
Would it be fair to say that seeker, seeking, and secret all become one?
Yeah, because in the seeker seeking there is the assumption that there's a secret. Yeah.
And Richard, you spoke of projection, a decline in projection, people report.
Yeah.
There's an inevitable decline, one could say, in neuroses or personality disorders, because personality disorders belong to the person.
I'm not going to comment on personality disorders. You know. I mean, if you're happy with that interpretation, fine, but I don't think I'm going to comment. But certainly, as always, I say there are no rules, absolutely no rules, so there's no reason why neurosis shouldn't get worse or continue as it is. But as a matter of fact, talking to people, listening to people and so forth, where the people, the word people is in inverted commas because there isn't a person there anymore, that's very common. It's extremely common that neurosis diminishes or collapses. Yeah.
Because neurosis, of course, belongs to the person.
Well, I'm not going to assent to that either, of course, because we could say neurosis appear to belong to the person, but of course there isn't a person. They don't really belong to the person. There's there's no particular, I mean, there's no reason in principle, it seems to me, I mean, this is sort of very conceptual, so in a way, who cares, but there's no reason in principle why neuroses shouldn't fully continue or get worse in principle, but as a matter of fact, they don't tend to. They tend to diminish or disappear.
Yeah, makes sense.
Do you know,
But you see that in a way, I mean, the problem with this kind of conversation, I mean, I love it, and at the same time, you know, there is a problem because we're kind of talking about. I mean, Tony talks about this a lot, I think, in his own in his own way. And I don't know if he's ever used this phrase or not, but the phrase that comes to me is, it's like, you know, we want there to be a goodie bag. Tony, one of the ways Tony talks about this a lot is, you know, he says, you know, the self is always a businessman or a business person, a businesswoman. We're always looking for a deal. What can I get out of this? What can I get out of this? Now what I can get out of this is reduced neurosis. What I can get out of this is I won't be depressed anymore. Well, maybe not. But it's kind of, that's the sort of, I'm going to use the word natural, that's the kind of natural way that the self deals with the world. The self deals with the world by always looking for a deal. This is the deal here. You know, I spend many hours sitting in frustration in talks with somebody sitting at the front talking about non-duality in ways that I either can barely understand or can't understand at all, because no one can. But the deal is I will then get something out of that called reduced neurosis or no more depression or whatever it might be. That's the way the self thinks.
What if those personality disorders are linked to the ego? And in non-duality, the ego disappears because there's no more self. You said before that a baby, we can't take a baby as being, he is already part of non-duality, right? This is because there's no ego there.
Right, this is going to be a complicated one. I'm just checking the time. We've got 7 minutes till tea. No, it's fine. It's great. It's great. The first thing I'm going to do, because I can't answer that question without throwing in this complication. People use the word ego in different ways. I want to say many different ways, but basically, for our purposes, up to 3 different ways, right? I haven't said the ego disappears, have I?
No. I made an assumption.
Again, whether it's senility or whether it's something else, I can't remember how you were. Yeah. So I haven't said the ego disappears. So you're asking me about, you know, to explain something I haven't said. But so I would say very, very briefly.
Yeah.
We tend to, you know, some people use the word ego to mean. You know, the sense of I, which is kind of what I'm talking about, the sense of I. Some people use it to mean ego as in, you know, he has a big ego, or he doesn't have a big ego, so he's conceited, he's selfish, she is conceited, she is selfish, and so on. Some people use the word ego, you know, like Freud does, as it's like, you know, the bit that mediates between the bit of me that just wants to make mayhem and have fun, you know, the id, and the bit of me that's very moralistic and wants to follow the rules, the superego. I mean,
What if it's everything? What if it's all 3?
Well, it is all 3, depending on, you know, it is all 3 depending on what you're trying to describe. But you're just trying to describe sort of bits of behaviour, as it were. But I haven't used that word. You see, so if I had done, if I'd said, well, what we're talking about here is the collapse of the ego, well, the first thing you'd be entitled to do is say, well, what do you mean by that? Which of those are you talking about? Now go back to the original thing you said, which I've now completely forgotten.
If the ego is tied to those personality disorders, and thus that would be the explanation. If the ego disappears, of course, the personality disorders disappears. So no more.
So maybe
non-duality.
Yeah. So maybe that's why I'm not assenting to that proposition. I'm not saying yes to that proposition because I don't relate to it. I think, well, first the you is this. I don't know what it means to say, well, the ego relates to personality disorders. Other than personality disorders do tend to affect the way people behave.
Mm-hmm.
So if by ego we're picking on that meaning, well, your ego is how you interact with other people, then yes, of course. If you have a borderline personality disorder, that is going to affect how that happens. Other than that, I'm not going to make, I've said this already, I'm not going to make any comments about personality disorders and what happens. Can there be personality disorders when the person is no longer there? I'd say probably yes, but I'm just making a guess. Don't let the terms fool you. I mean, you might say, how can it be a personality disorder if the person isn't there? That's ridiculous. Well, it's just the term, personality disorder.
If there can be a personality that continues, there can be anything.
That's a good answer. I like your answer better than mine. Yeah, because clearly, I would say clearly, unless physical death has taken place at the same time, then a personality continues. It may be very much changed or it may not be, but a personality will continue. So why not a personality disorder? I have no answer to that question because I don't think there is a possible answer.
I wasn't necessarily looking for one.
No. Good, because you probably won't get one, yeah.
I don't know if this comes into it or not, but scenario, I'm walking down the road and I think, who is tall, or don't like a skirt, or don't like a hairstyle or something, and you slip down the curb and for about 3 seconds there's nothing, oh gosh, just not even pain because there's nobody to sort of, know it's pain before it all comes back. Oh my goodness, fancy the council doing that, and just very, very short bursts of time that there's nobody there.
Because something so immediate has happened.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. I think another thing that may relate to that, I've commented on before, so have others, is that time, that brief time after waking up in the morning, or on waking up in the morning.
Yes, that's right.
It's like it takes a bit of time in the story of time for the person to reassemble itself.
And all the thoughts to crowd in,
Yeah.
and all your worries to come in.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, what a great blessing it is to wake up and realise all one's worries and concerns are still there. But there can be this time where there's just, waking up has happened out of sleep in that sense, and yet, the person has not yet reassembled itself.
There's a lovely memoir where someone said they were staying at Peter Sellers' house, and when Peter Sellers would wake up, there'll be a period where he'd be having all these different accents. He wasn't quite too sure which one belonged to him, and find, oh, this is me now. Yes, where it is. And he'd go through all these different facades, really. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've heard that about actors. Actors sometimes find, well, where's the me? If I played this role in this TV series for 5 years, and then another role, then surely I'm playing a role.
Yeah.
Yeah, most of the time.
Yeah.
And then that can be an avenue for realizing, well, who is the real me, so to speak.
Yeah. It's a good metaphor. I think it's complex, though. I think we'll probably have to have tea in a minute because it is complex. Because in a way, I'm thinking particularly of the method actor and so forth. In the way, they stop inhabiting their me and they start inhabiting a different me. They don't become me this or I less. They inhabit a different one. And then habit is in a way, I mean, again, if you follow the kind of method acting technique and other things like that, they become in a way which is as real in inverted commas in terms of like emotion and so forth as the me that they've just vacated.
Yeah.
So as the actor steps into the role of Hamlet, you can imagine them, it's like a kind of an empty actor corpse lying in the wings, which the actor has just vacated in order to animate the puppet, which is Hamlet, in a way. I have a very strong sense that that bit will get cut if this video goes public. It's definitely time for tea at this point.